Welcome to Beyond Acting, Other Jobs in Theater. Today we are talking with costume designers. Let's meet the Zoom panel.
Hi, I'm Teresa Ham. I'm a costume designer and I work primarily in live theater.
Hi, my name is Riaz Gomez and I'm a costume designer.
Hello, my name is Christina Leineke and I am a costume designer and costume technologist.
Hello, my name is Karen and I'm a costume designer.
Great, thank you all for being here. So let's get into it with the first question. What does it mean to you to be a costume designer?
A costume designer is a storyteller.
I make real clothes for pretend people.
I've always loved storytelling, and I think of it as you are creating the moment before. A character gets dressed in the morning just like each of us do, and they get dressed with purpose and intention and with psychological choices made that we aren't privy to before the play starts.
So a costume designer is a person who takes characters that are written in plays or movies or dance or really anything that is created in our imagination, and we interpret what they might wear or put on their bodies.
In charge of creating the garments that the characters live in for the play.
And that can be clothes, that can be body paint, it can be just about anything.
But also one time I was asked to put together sort of a branding thing, and I came up with a statement that I thought was really silly, but other people understood it. I can say I am a character creation specialist who uses engineering and creativity to turn flat fabrics into three-dimensional creations to fit human bodies.
Basically analyze the characters and see what they're feeling, what the mood is, what the themes of the plays are, and create clothes around that.
All of the choices the costume designer makes communicates those wordlessly to an audience at the top of a play or a scene.
By doing so, I enhance fictional worlds.
Awesome. Let's go a little more in depth and hear about your process as a costume designer.
So once I get the offer, first thing I want to do is make sure I have the right version of the script and read it repeatedly.
Reading the material, if there is material to read. If there isn't material to read, then it's a lot of talking to collaborators and creators.
My job basically starts with talking to the director.
At the very least, I want to read the script once before I go into the first meeting with the rest of the team, but ideally I'm going to read it 3 or 4 times.
I sort of start with the reading of the scripts. I write down descriptive words, sensory things that come to me, anything that pops into my head that will guide me on a research journey.
Taking notes, doing research.
From there, I try to go with key images. I don't look at clothing images right away. I look at emotional quality images that communicate the world of the play.
I get all my images together, all my reference images, basically anything I need to know about the show before I start putting pen to paper.
Usually the director has images for me as well. And if we overlap, huzzah.
My research comes both from just online Googling things, but also I have a huge library of books that I like to refer to.
I always go to books first because I am a child of the 80s and we did not have the internet.
As a costume designer, you spend a lot of time tracking down a director's favorite image that may or may not exist still in space and time.
And then I'd go online, everyone does now, and talk to colleagues, do all this research, sort of collect all of the ideas.
If I'm doing a modern dress play, I really don't like presenting a director with options that I cannot purchase today.
And then there's the process of sifting through those ideas, and then pick out the ones you like, pick out the ones that are the best.
I'm going to whittle down the research to hit specifics of characters so that each character sort of has their own research play.
You could even just be like, I am inspired by trees. So I'm going to go outside and take photographs and touch barks of trees and leaves and figure out, the textures of those. And that's going to be the catalyst for your design.
Pinterest is actually a really helpful resource to communicate research. I've been doing that a lot recently. Creating visual research boards to just get big images out there. It's great because a director can comment on specific images.
In between all of this, there's more meetings with the design team, so I'm not working in a vacuum.
Talk to your colleagues again, present that research. This is where this piece has led me. It's led me to these things. And sometimes, your collaborators are like, yes, perfect, I got it, I see where you're going, I love this. And sometimes they say, I sort of see where you're going, but can you help me out a little bit? Or sometimes they might say, this is not at all what we were thinking. Maybe you should do something else.
Sometimes the director and designers don't immediately see the play the same way. And so we have to continue to negotiate, and we like things about each other's research until we combine a key image research world.
You go back, and you pour over research again, or you re-sift, you change the elements, or you move stuff around.
And from there, I just start drawing and Pinteresting and just making basically mood boards and sketches.
If it's modern dress, we stick with those research collages, and I don't usually sketch the show up.
If the process requires it, and sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't, you do drawings and sketches. Sometimes you just collage the research together and you go shopping.
Doing sketches, fabric shopping, depending on the show that I'm working on. I might also go into costume storage and pull things.
If it's a show where we are building costumes, which is really exciting, I'm going to move from those research collages into thumbnail sketches, which are little 6-inch figures that I draw so that we can start to make sure the director and I are on the same page about the silhouette ideas.
Then just start drawing little doodles.
I might be sort of shopping either out in the real world or just online shopping to see what's out there that could be used for the show.
And then I start to look for fabrics so that we can build a family of fabrics for a built costume. I try to not put a fabric on a sketch unless I've purchased it already, because sometimes we can agree on a fabric and we have to wait for budgetary reasons to purchase it, and the fabric gets purchased out from under us.
Putting renderings together with the specifics that I've found, so using the actual fabrics.
Fabric is a finite thing. It's so dependent upon what the trends and seasons are in popular fashion.
So you get through that sort of creative process, you sort of draw it up or sketch it up or make some final collages, and everyone in the room, because it's not just you, director, producers, set designers, sound designers, light designers, everybody talks about it.
And from there, I meet up with the director again, and we just make sure that our visions are in line with everything, with the set, lights, and everything like that.
And then you sort of say, great, this is where we're going. And we call those final designs.
Hopefully at this point, there's a presentation to the cast once the designs have been approved by the director.
I would say at the end of the day, nothing's ever final until the film is rolling or the audience is, or there's butts and seats. And even then, sometimes it's not all the way final,
From there is usually when I get into measurements with the actors, so I can see what type of bodies I'm working with, what kind of areas I want to accentuate.
I've actually taken to creating a questionnaire for storefront theater so that I can find out about allergies or medical conditions or their personal comfort level and preferences. I've even started asking, what do you really like about your body and what do you dislike about your body? I appreciate them just telling me straight up, what do you like, what do you not like, what do you need from me, so that we can have a really successful and productive first fitting. So that has been extremely helpful. Once I figured that out, from a couple of shows, I find that the performers also feel really seen by that gesture as well.
Then they move from that process of being just paper or ideas into reality, into garments, for lack of a better word, because we're going to say garments because clothes just doesn't seem to be the right word every time. So they move into wearable pieces.
Do whatever I need to do to get the clothes that I need. So that's renting, buying, borrowing.
It's a lot more shopping. It's a lot more pulling, possibly building costumes.
They can be crafted pieces, they can be sewn pieces, but it is the designer's job to make sure that as the garments are being created, that they're being created in the right aesthetic.
Fittings with each of the actors so that I know what's working and what's not.
Now, I am the decision maker on the costumes, but the performer collaborates with me heavily.
And the performer can be, puppets. They can be people. Sometimes they're animals.
If it's a large show, there might be a second round of shopping and pulling and building, going into more fittings with the actors.
Breathing life into it is what I always describe it as when we're in the costume fittings. I'm not the type of costume designer who feels very precious about a sketch or a research collage. I think it's a roadmap or a blueprint to where we're headed. It's not the final destination.
The next rounds of fittings, and then that's when the real magic happens, and we get to put clothes on actors and see how they look, how everything looks together.
I don't think the art is on the paper. The art is on the character walking around.
Sometimes when you get into the fittings, you're like, wow, that thing that I thought was perfect is not perfect. There's a lot of thinking on your feet in those moments. And things that you thought were going to work on paper, sometimes they just don't work in reality. So then you go back.
And then it's another meeting with the director.
That whole process sort of starts over, right? Because then you do your research and you talk to their director.
Once we get through our fittings, I want to start churning out those alterations so we can get the costumes ready for either publicity photos sometimes or for the first dress tech rehearsal.
Technical rehearsal, right? We take all the things that we that we think are going to be great and they're going to work, and you put them on stage and you try them out.
In tech, we just see how everything comes together. And that's really where we do the fine tuning, making sure that everything looks good, no one's missing anything, all the tracks and all the costume changes work.
So then you have a period of time. Sometimes that period is very short, sometimes that period is longer. On Broadway, that period, that sort of technical rehearsal process is longer, and then they have preview process, which means then you get to see how audience reacts to the work itself.
Hopefully we have a manageable amount of notes throughout that process. And, there's a certain amount of turnover each day. Sometimes there's so many notes, you have to ask your team to prioritize what is important for them, what they need to be different by the next day. And usually people are very supportive of that.
Then from there, it's basically opening night. And then after opening night, my job is basically done.
Joy of joys, the show opens and the costume design remains frozen. It can't change.
For Broadway or for live performance, once the show is called open, I sort of let it go.
There's maybe time to come in for repairs. If a repair is needed.
If we have any kind of understage and things like that, then I come back in.
I hate to say it, but even then, if an actor falls ill or leaves the production, sometimes I get called back and they say, well, the things that you designed for this other person, they don't really work with this other actor. So can you come back? You do. And then you fix it and you do it again.
And then once it's all done, a lot of times I will also participate in strike.
And then eventually you do have to strike the production. You come and collect everything, you get it clean. We have to clean everything and return it to whence it came or put it back in storage.
When it closes, personally, I don't have a responsibility at the level that I'm designing in theater after the show closes, unless it's going to be remounted. Once it closes, generally it's the property then, the physical property of the theater, the intellectual property of me. So if the show gets remounted, then I come back and I help them sort of figure out how to remount it on new actors or replace garments that have not withstood the test of time. In theater, when you see a revival of a show or a tour, generally that's the same person's design again, but just sort of reimagined by that person. That would be like sort of the circular motion of that process.
And how about the time frame commitment? We'll go from the time you accept the offer until your last day on the job.
So the offer comes anywhere from like a year and a half to possibly just a few weeks before we start design meetings.
The year out really is sort of, for me, the most ideal time.
So usually in an ideal world, I get the contract about maybe 5 months out from opening.
Usually after I get an offer, I try to reach out to speak to the director right away and set up time to talk.
The more time you have for that initial part of the design, I always think you get a more rich and sort of well-rounded product.
I sort of work on an academic calendar still because a lot of theaters do. So usually in the spring, I know what I'm doing from fall through the following spring.
However, that doesn't always work that way. Sometimes people leave projects or projects start up and the timeline all of a sudden is like, hey, we're going to do this and we're going to do it in 3 months.
If it's one of those 6-week processes, I want to talk to them immediately. If it's a 6-month process, we can take a couple of weeks to figure out how we feel about the play.
Once we start design meetings, ideally it's about 6 weeks before rehearsals start.
We usually have, if it's a shorter process, a production meeting a week or every 2 weeks. when that's where the entire production team gets together and talks about where we are.
Sometimes creativity, especially in those moments, like, those like pressure moments of tech, or when you're hired onto a project late, sometimes those like bursts of creativity, like I have to solve this problem right now, and I have to, and we don't use the word problem, right? We're supposed to use the word challenge. I have to solve this challenge right now.
Within those 2 months after is usually just time with the director, meetings.
It's a pretty quick turnaround once I get feedback. I like to hammer away pretty much every day on my research until I know I have collages that are representative. In the shorter process, I am very focused on getting those images together and approved so I can start purchasing, because it is the purchasing. My fittings are entirely dependent upon whenever anything arrives.
And then the actual production part of it, where I'm actually gathering costumes and fitting them on actors, can be anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. And again, that depends on the amount of rehearsal time that the director has with the cast.
Usually my time frame when I get actual physical actors and when rehearsal starts, it's usually about 3 months.
Fittings, I try to hammer out in a couple days, especially in a storefront situation. It's so hard to take people out of rehearsal in a storefront production because they are so needed in the room that I try not to take up any extra time if I can help it.
From there, I'm usually working with the actors and working with the director more hands-on. And from then it's more physical of what do these clothes actually look like on real people and what can we physically find.
In professional shows, a lot of times we will not start fittings until the actors are in rehearsal, because that comes in their rehearsal time that they're being paid for. In academic shows, we may be able to start before the rehearsals actually do.
I'm trying always to preserve at least 2 weeks to do notes and get the show ready to go on stage.
Typical dress rehearsal period is about 3 or 4 dress rehearsals. I've done it in as few as 2, and I think I've done as many as 6.
You treat the whole thing as a session to change things, notes. It's all fair game at that point. And then we open, so.
And how about your favorite thing about being a costume designer?
My favorite thing about doing costume design.
I think my favorite thing is just creating the world that these actors live in.
I always joke that I never got over playing dress up as a child.
The best thing about being a costume designer is that I pretty much never have to do the same thing twice.
You get to create what these people live, breathe. You get to create a really tangible thing.
I play dress up for a living, and I love that. I didn't really know this was a profession until I got into college, but looking back, there's just a zillion things that led me towards this path.
My favorite thing about doing costume design is really getting to reach into other worlds, really, and sort of investigate how I can relate to other people.
There were a couple moments when I've done kind of iconic shows I've worked on where I do like this because the 5-year-old inside of me is really excited.
And it's always unique and creative and strange and different. And I love that it's never predictable.
I always say an audience knows when a costume design is right. And an audience will let you know when a costume design is right. And that's kind of my favorite part, is people being able to be like, oh, I know that person just by what they're wearing.
I like to investigate relationships and think about the psychology of, if I were a person living in this particular place, in this particular time, with these particular circumstances, how would I outwardly portray myself? And that gives me also gives me a lot of clarity personally, but it gives me great joy to sort of embody all of these personalities, even though I can only be myself. I can't be all of these people.
I think the best part about costume design is that it lives on beyond the production. The sets are struck, the lights are refocused and gelled, the sound cues are reprogrammed, but the costume design comes off stage, is cleaned and stored for another designer to come along and reinterpret.
My favorite thing about being a costume designer is creating that world and the tangible objects that people can relate to and see and want.
So then, what is the worst thing about being a costume designer?
The worst part of being a costume designer, I will have to say, is Probably laundry.
It's a very real thing that I have been the number of times in small and large productions where people have asked me to change the color of a built costume versus changing a lighting cue is really high. And it just goes to tell me that people do not understand proportionally the amount of work that goes into those two changes.
Often I am sometimes the only woman at the table, and sometimes I'm the only person in my entire department. And sometimes when I look across the table, even directorially or at choreography, but especially at my counter design departments, they have help.
The worst thing about the job is coordinating schedules with the actors, just trying to get everybody's time aligned so that I have enough time to do what I need in a fitting.
Even if it's brand new clothes, it's like there might be a stain here or there might be something like that. And that's always the part that I hate doing.
But also there seems to never be enough time or ever enough money to do what I would dream to do.
One of the things that is most challenging about my job is that I joke that I'm in customer service as well. And so a lot of my job is convincing people to wear things they don't want to wear, or convincing a director to at least look at my idea before we reject it.
The worst part about being a costume designer is that historically we are not paid as much or valued as much as our male counterparts in the room.
Sometimes I wind up the recipient of feelings that have nothing to do with me or my work, you know. The process is very frustrating for a variety of reasons, and costume designers seem to be the sympathetic shoulder and ear.
At a bigger house, theatrically, yes, there's a staff. But if you look at the way that the staff is tiered and how much they're paid and their job security, they tend to not be paid as much as their male counterparts too, all the way down the line in our industry.
All you can really do is try to be supportive and collaborative and encourage the process to move forward with that information.
Pay transparency. We don't do that. We tend to not do that. As artists, we don't even really like to talk about it with ourselves. Like, I don't want to quantify my art for you, so I'm not really even going to admit to myself that I'm probably not making what I should make on this. Pay transparency between departments can save a lot of the industry, right? Just talking about how much you make and whether or not it is a justifiable living for the amount of work and labor that you're putting in.
It's important to remember that theater isn't exempt from discrimination, something we should all be thinking about more. Thank you all for sharing. Let's shift over to the necessary skills for the position. What are some useful skills that make for a good costume designer?
Oh gosh, so necessary skills.
For a costume designer, skills that are really useful are drawing skills.
I think a necessary skill is just to have a creative eye. I know a lot of people who are self-taught. I know people who have gone to college. I know people who have master's degrees. But I think we all have a really creative eye and really great problem-solving skills.
I think you have to be curious. That is like the number one thing.
That's the kind of skills that you need to have to be a costume designer, is just being able to look at things in a different perspective and really be able to use whatever you kind of have on hand to make magic happen.
You have to be super curious about a lot of things, about people and places and time periods and beings that are not like you.
You need to have an understanding of clothing history through time. It helps to have an understanding of world history, what's been going on in the time that these people are living in.
Something that's made me really good at my job is having worked wardrobe. I think that a lot of people don't have the experience in costume design of having run a show.
You have to be collaborative because, as I said before, like, it doesn't exist in a bubble. I don't read the play and then decide what everyone wears and the end, it's awesome. Like, I have to talk to directors and producers and actors.
Sewing helps, but it's not mandatory. A lot of people think that a costume designer has to be able to sew. It's not true. Helpful, but not mandatory.
Sewing is helpful, but it's not required. I know a few costume designers who don't know how to sew. but they do amazing work.
Just sort of personality traits, I think, that make a good costume designer. I think flexibility. You're going to need to be flexible because everybody has an opinion, and especially if it's a modern dress show, because everybody wears clothes, right? Not everybody knows how to put a set together. So they don't give the TD an opinion on how they attach two pieces of wood. But since everybody wears clothes, everybody has an idea on what the character should be wearing.
And you have to be open to listening to them and really hearing them, being willing to put your own ego to the side sometimes. I'm not saying don't have an ego, right? But you have to balance that ego. When is it okay for me to insert my stuff? And when do I have to sort of step back and listen to what somebody else is bringing?
A thorough understanding of the human body in all of its differences, because that is our canvas, is that we're putting clothes on all of these different people.
I think it's just like a willingness to like play and learn, because there's a lot that I don't know, but every single show that I go into, I'm like, okay, what can I learn from this?
When I was super young, I think I must have been 20 years old or so, I worked at the Opera Theater St. Louis. I was working on wardrobe, and they pulled us out in groups, and we were able to have little one-on-one mini sessions with the designers and creative teams of each of the operas that year. And I did a portfolio review with Martin Pasadena, who's an amazing Tony Award-winning costume designer. Look him up if you don't know him. He's wonderful. And I asked this question in the group. I asked the question, what happens when the other people at the table don't want to listen to your idea? And he said, maybe you should try listening to their ideas. You have it backwards. I was like, well, yeah, that's much better. So it sort of just changed the way that I behave in the room, that moment. So I think being a good listener and being a good collaborator is probably the most important thing I think you have to have as a costume designer.
You want to be a person that people can work with long hours, tired hours, frustrated hours, and still enjoy working with.
Makes sense. So what about the thing that you'll never have to do? What is your favorite thing about being a costume designer, knowing you'll never have to do that thing?
The thing I think I never have to do.
So as a costume designer, I am really happy that I never have to be on stage or memorize lines.
I think my favorite thing that I'll never have to do, I love sound designers, and I think the work is amazing.
I don't have to worry about speaker placements, and that brings me so much joy.
Sound design for me makes no sense. So I'm just really happy that I will never have to touch sound design, and I will never have to do sound design.
Audio is one of the things, that I'm glad that there are people that are into it, because when they're good at it, it's amazing.
I am grateful when I see heavy things being lifted and I don't have to do that.
When I'm sitting in tech, I'm really glad that I don't ever have to try and navigate moving scenery and coordinate that, because that just seems like a nightmare to me.
I'm grateful that the massive amount of energy to get us to the tuck dress, I am not involved in all of the physical manifestation of that being able to start. I am manifesting very difficult things, but in a much more less physically strenuous way. So
because of my lack of understanding of science, I'm really happy that I never have to calculate angles of lighting.
Honestly, I'm grateful. I think about this all the time. I am not in a cubicle all day. And there are a lot of people make their money in an office building in a cubicle, and I pay my bills sewing a wig onto a backwards baseball hat. And I love how weird my job is.
And who on the team should you be good friends with and have a solid working relationship with?
So there's two people that I always say I want to be best friends with. Technically three, but
I want to be best friends and a great collaborator with my lighting designer, because I think the lighting designer has the most power of anyone on the production team, and I don't think people realize that.
The scene designer is a good one to be friends with, to make sure that you never use the exact same fabric on a costume that they're using on a set piece.
Take all these things that we've made 3D in real life, and then it goes on stage and it's two-dimensional, and then the lighting designer is in charge of sculpting back out that detail.
My number one person that I want to be best friends with is the actors. My job is the actors. If you're really good friends with your actors are more than willing to try things on, more than willing to try new things or go in a direction that you really want to go in.
Specifically as a costume designer, you need to be able to get along with the actors. Having that ability to have an easy communication makes the fittings easier, to understand what it is that they're doing with the character so that what you do really supports what it is that they're developing in rehearsal.
I do a lot of musical theater, and I was not prepared for how closely I was going to work with sound. And I love working with sound, but sound and costumes have the most work to do with the performer's body. And hair and makeup, of course, too. Hair and makeup you want to be best friends with as well, but sound and hair and makeup and costumes, we all work with the performer.
My second best friend is always the stage manager, because they're the ones who usually set up the fitting schedules, and they're the ones who usually figure out where you go on the tech line. So I always want to have good open communications with my stage managers.
Everyone should be best friends with their stage manager regardless. Stage manager, they are working their butt off. They are in control of a lot of things, and specifically, they are managing when I get access to the actors. I know that that's a department that receives a lot of struggle and problem rather than solution and thank you. And so I try to bring them thank you and appreciation, and also here's my list of needs.
I would say it's really important to be friends with the choreographer.
And then obviously my third one is the director, because they're the ones who have the grand vision of the whole show. So if I'm good in with the director, they will keep me abreast of anything that changes.
For any designer, it's really useful to be friends with your director to make sure that you can speak the same language and are utilizing the same vocabulary. So when you say something, they know immediately what it is that you're talking about.
The movement and the ways that performers move in the clothes, I mean, that changes everything. That changes how long or short the skirts can be, what kind of shoes they have to wear. Do their sleeves have to have gussets? Can they wear hats? Should they wear glasses? Are jangly earrings gonna whip them in the face when they're doing their kick turns or whatever? And asking about some of their lingo. If you don't know what a full layout is, you should probably find out. Because your choreographer should be right there next to you, talking you through this movement looks like this, it feels like this, and these are the things the clothes need to do. And that totally changes and affects your design 100%.
So what if you like costume design but want to try something with slightly different skill requirements? What would be some fun options for students who like costume design to consider?
If you like costumes, but being a designer feels overwhelming to you, or you don't feel like that this is the right fit for you, look into costume shop management. Look into wardrobe supervision.
There's a lot of jobs under the costume realm.
There's always the option of being a design assistant, and I think this is true in any of the design areas, where you're working with somebody else to help develop ideas. There's
assistant, which is great, and you're kind of the middleman between the costume designer and production staff.
And I think you have to think about in these sort of aspects, what do I like about the job? Do I like creating the garment? Then maybe you want to move into costume technology.
I'm a pretty dressmaker. That's my secondary skill set from costume design, is I can make beautiful dresses.
If you are a good stitcher or pattern maker, you can move into the technical side of costuming so that you're creating the costumes. There's a lot of artistry and creativity that comes in developing the patterns.
Or you could say, I really love the connections with the actors. Well, then wardrobe might be for you.
Wardrobe, where you basically run the show backstage and you make sure that all the changes happen.
I even had some skills that have translated to properties. I have upholstery training where I can go and reupholster furniture, and it's actually really fun to do that. It's very satisfying to tear a piece of furniture apart and put it back together prettier than you found it.
There's a lot of propstumes that I like to call them. So costumes that are kind of props and props that are kind of costumes in the theater world. So we have a lot of artisanal people in our craft.
Maybe you just like being the boss And then being the costume director would be for you. And that would be like managing the interworkings of an entire costume department.
One job that I think a lot of people are not as familiar with is that in larger areas, there are people who are just shoppers. That's a really nice connection to costume design that you can do with the skills that you gain from learning about it.
Shoppers, which are great, which is basically you go out and buy the show. The designer talks to you and is like, these are what I'm looking for, go and find them.
You could say, I really like designing, but I don't like how long the process is. You know, maybe you want to get into commercial design. Maybe that's for you, you know, where you go on set for commercial filming and it takes 2 weeks and then it's over.
Also being a stylist. So this is something that sort of branches out of the theater, but into television, or like even the newscasters often have somebody who has styled them.
Maybe you want to be a community theater member activist and really bring theater and quality costumes to your community. That's definitely a job.
I think that I've always been really interested in clothing history and work in museums. If you honestly look, anywhere there is sewn fabric is a translatable skill.
So if there's something that if you like to tinker or make things, then you can easily fall under a costume category.
And on to my favorite question. What is the coolest or most bizarre item you legally didn't have to pay taxes on, either for a show or personally as a freelance artist?
Oh yeah, the tax exempt form. Oh God, I love the tax exempt form.
So the weirdest things that I have bought under a tax deduction for my job are condoms to make blood packs.
Alcohol, we use it in theater to clean costumes. So we can get alcohol that's tax deductible sometimes, depending on where you are and your state rolls.
Lots and lots of really cheap vodka.
We buy a lot of alcohol to spray the clothes down. Vodka and water is actually the best thing to clean and freshen the clothes.
And you get a lot of really strange looks when you're going through the checkout with a giant stack of condoms and really cheap vodka at the same time and ask for it to be tax deductible. That's always a fun one to explain.
You know, it's not a big deal at the craft stores or the supply stores, but when you are shopping for clothes or shoes,
especially if you're also buying the red food coloring to make the blood packs, that always gets you some strange looks.
This is my favorite one. I didn't deduct it, but it's a really funny story. So I had a shoe that was broken, a tap shoe that was broken, and it needed like a very specific screw, you know, to fix the shoe. And I had to find the screw, and I went everywhere and I was like, I don't know what to do.
Always the weirdest one that's tax deductibles is when you're doing a show that has to do with a lot of lingerie.
And I took the shoe, just the single shoe, into the Ace Hardware, and I put the shoe on the counter, and I was like, I need a screw that fits this hole. Is very tiny, but it has to be secure and in there so that way the tap doesn't fall off. And the man behind the counter at the Ace Hardware was like,
underwear or corsets, because you'll just go into Target and buy massive amounts of bras, lingerie and panties, and then be like, this is all tax deductible.
I think my favorites were when I was in university and I had to purchase undergarments from Victoria's Secret. And that is a thing that the university started to ask questions about.
And he took the shoe and he took it to the back and he tried every single little tiny screw. And he's like, you know, there's something wrong with the thing. So he re-tapped the hole that had the little screw in, and he put a teeny tiny screw in, and he gave me a ticket and he said, go to the front, you know, and pick. It took him like a half an hour.
It's just great to see a big gay guy go into a store and come out with $500 worth of underwear. It's kind of fun.
And he gave me the ticket and I went to the front, and the guy was like, he looked at the ticket and he looked at me and he goes, well, where's the screw? And I held up the shoe and I was like, it's in there. It's in here. And he was like, that will be 6 cents.
It's like the combativeness, I think, is my favorite thing of every cashier. Or the number of people who tell you, oh, you're not allowed. We don't do that here. We don't. I'm like, legally you do. Like, this is a thing. You absolutely do.
So like I paid 6 cents for a teeny tiny screw, and one half hour of this poor man's time.
I love that I can deduct any fashion magazines that I want to read are also deductible because it is keeping me up to date on current research. Same goes with books about clothing or fashion. And tickets to go to the theater are tax deductible because it is additional research for my job.
I've done a lot of Disney projects. So my sister lives in Orlando. So when I do Disney projects, I take a trip down there and I do a bunch of research, either at Disney World or just in and around the Orlando area, and I write those up. So that's a benefit.
That's a cool perk. How about your personal inspiration? Who or what inspired you to choose a career in costume design?
When I was a little girl, I liked to play dress up with my Barbie dolls, and my Barbies had the largest wardrobe of anyone ever.
I went to college on an acting scholarship, but for my acting scholarship, the college said you have to do hours, service hours for this money, and you can choose where you do it. And they gave me like 3 choices, and I said, okay, well, I'll do it in the costume shop. That sounds fine.
So I've always been interested in theater since I was small. I've loved movie musicals, that sort of thing.
So I've always been into sewing. I started sewing. My grandmother taught me how to sew when I was younger. And then in high school, I took actual classes and I always really liked it.
In high school and starting to think about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, when your guidance counselor asks, what are you going to go to college for? It was easier for me to eliminate all of the things that I didn't want to do because I didn't like math or science and I wasn't very good at them. So it sort of came down to English or theater, and theater seemed more fun.
I was really involved in high school theater, and I went to college thinking I was going to teach high schools theater programs. And I was a freshman in college and had to take a practicum class, which was sort of our intro to the department, where they kind of hammered etiquette and how to behave. And it also required us to run a crew.
So I started going to the costume shop 2 days a week, and then 2 days a week became 3 days a week, and then it became 4 days a week, and then it became my evenings on Saturdays. And
I was doing theater for a while in middle school and high school. So then when I got into college, I actually was a chemistry major, but my work study was in the costume shop because they had just built a brand new costume shop.
I started working in the costume shop because I knew how to sew, and my love for costume design was born then, and I knew it was what I wanted to do forever.
It gave us some choice in what we signed up for, and the only thing I thought I had any comparable skills in was the costume crew, because I knew how to take care of clothing. I knew how to press and steam.
I got my first job, and my first paying theater job when I was 20 at the Opera Theater St. Louis, running wardrobe. And I was like, I love this. Like, I love this.
The costume supervisor came and asked me, like, hey, would you ever be interested in designing a show? I have this little show that I think would be good for a student if you want to, try it out. And so I was like, cool, yeah, why not? Sure.
I got my degree, and I knew that I didn't have enough information. Like, I just knew that if I were to go and try to be a costume professional with that training, I don't think I would have succeeded. So I went to graduate school.
I really loved running wardrobe. Because I was someone who walked in with some sort of competence and equivalent skills, they made me the lead dresser on that show.
So then I designed my first show when I was a sophomore in college, and I was like, oh, I really like this. This is fun. I get to really control the creative process and really get to play and just try new things.
I went to design school, and I knew after I got done with design school that this was the job for me.
Meanwhile, my costume shop manager, Carrie Beth Rust, she's still at Illinois State University. She had her eye on me. She was like, this one can do this.
I moved to Chicago, and then I worked for the Lyric Opera for a couple of years. And then I had a baby. I was working in a shop and I was using my degree, but the work-life balance of my life at that time was not great.
I had an internship that summer at the Illinois Shakespeare Festival, and internship money is not great. And I realized that if I could do it for pennies an hour, and still love it, then maybe I should consider it as a career.
And a colleague from graduate school said, I have a director friend who's looking for a designer for these 2 shows. would you be interested? And it meant that I would have to quit my job as at the Lyric as a stitcher or, wardrobe person there.
My senior year, I switched my major and became a theater major and went and started costume design. And I've been professionally doing it for over 10 years now.
Took a leap and said yes. And that year sort of was the catalyst of me just being a freelance designer full time. And my son was 3 and he turns 13 this year. So it's been 10 years of me just being a freelance designer.
In terms of making clothing as well, because I'm both a designer and a technician, I would often take fabric and just sort of cut it and tie it onto Barbie until it looked the way I wanted to. So I was draping fabrics in that way.
That was the path. It just sort of fell into place for me when I sort of fit. I was like, this is where I fit. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is where I feel happiest.
But looking back, like all of the things I've collected over my life, all of the things I was interested in, all the times I wanted to learn to sew or make things, or, the dolls I wanted were ones in Victorian clothing, so I have always loved the storytelling of past and what we can learn about ourselves in the present by looking back.
And for our final question, let's hear about your dream project. What is the show or venue or whatever that you've always wanted to try as a costume designer?
I was in choir in high school, and we sang a song from the musical Aida called My Strongest Suit. And I was obsessed with that song and didn't know I was a costume designer yet, but looking back, obviously, was obsessed with that song. There's a fashion show in the middle of that song in a dance break, and I have always wanted to do an Egyptian fashion show.
First, I really, really, really want to work with Frantic Assembly in England. They're a theater company that I've loved and adored and followed them religiously. I think the work they do is so brilliant and their physical theater pieces are amazing.
The dream show for me, I don't necessarily know exactly which one, but something that is big and gorgeous and lavish 1770s. I want the big panniers. I want the huge wigs. I want the gorgeous, rich fabrics.
Big dream, I think, would be to go back to school and get my doctorate in essentially the history of Western dress as told through a feminist perspective.
Second, the show that I want to do so badly is Intimate Apparel by Lynn Nottage, because I want to design those costumes so badly.
Also sometimes daydream about designing a heat miser, snow miser, as sort of a burlesque or boylesque version of themselves, because there's a Big Bad Voodoo Daddy version of that song that's just awesome. If you haven't listened to it, listen to it. And I always see a production number in my head when I listen to that song.
I think I'd like to do that in Europe because they have more history there than we do. And that's my big dream, is to look at costumes and history as people wear, we wear costumes, and how we dress ourselves, and really sort of go back and study that.
It was sort of a joke in grad school about, we had always joked with our students, our undergrad students, that you could set it in outer space if you wanted to. And so I challenged myself to do a Star Wars Lysistrata. I think it would be really fun to truly apply those concepts, which are heavily copyrighted, to something like that, because it sort of worked.
So something maybe like Dangerous Liaisons with an unlimited budget and huge amounts of time to be able to build everything. Since in that show specifically, we see undergarments as well as the clothing that they're wearing, just to be able to do the amazing elaborate details that come from that period in just the most extravagant way would be the ultimate dream.
And my third is I just want to create an iconic costume. That's always my goal when I'm designing the show. I want to create at least one iconic costume that people are like, oh, that's from that show.
One of my heroes is Bob Mackie when he was designing for Carol Burnett's show. And you think of Bob Mackie as just a designer of beautiful gowns for Cher. And he does that beautifully, but he also does hysterical visual joke. And so I would love to continue to do more hysterical visual joke.
I don't know that will ever be a reality for me. But going back and looking at then like how feminist perspectives throughout history, and then feminist perspectives in costumes and film, and how we sort of continue to sort of evolve in how we present ourselves outwardly. That's my big dream.
And as we wrap up, let's get our final thoughts. Your closing statements, please.
So as a beginner student in the theater, as you're trying to sort of find out what it is you want to do, I think it's really important to explore all areas. One of the things that I really appreciated about my education is that we looked at all of the different jobs that people did. I took classes in a lot of different areas so that I could understand what everybody else did, but also be able to narrow it down to why I like costuming specifically. So I knew it going in that it was something that I loved, but really seeing what everybody else does gives an appreciation for all of the jobs, because we work together collaboratively all the time. We need to understand what everybody does, but also really helped me to understand that I love costuming because I really like creating the life for that character, thinking about all of the clothes that they didn't choose to wear that day, I think is equally as important as finding the thing that they did choose to wear that day. How you represent yourself every day of the week, what you choose to put on every morning when you get up to go somewhere. All of those things that you make the decisions for that character are so fascinating to me.
I want to say that there's a lot of things you can learn in theater. You may not continue to do theater the rest of your life, but there's a lot of useful, great skills that you can learn taking and doing theater. And there's so many things that I've learned that I've taken throughout my years, and it's really helped me just kind of be able to do it all. And it's really helped me with being able to make physical connections, personal connections, really helped me be able to navigate this uncertain time, really, and really helped me be able to kind of keep pushing forward. And whenever there's a twist or a turn, there's a way to make it better. And I think that's really helped from theater, and that's really gotten me where I am today.
Yeah, I could say, because I'm talking to students and young people and people who are interested in this, I'd say, you know, look around you, like look around the room, and next to you and in front of you and behind you. And those are the people that will be with you throughout your generation of making theater and art. Like those are your contacts. Those are your people. Those are the people that will support you or help you if you're in a bind. Those are the people that will surprise you with a job offer when you maybe thought you had a dry spell. Those are the people that you'll call when you need a favor. Those are the people that are going to be your collaborators sort of throughout your process as an artist, and making good connections with those people and really seeing them, that will only help you throughout your career, is sort of knowing who your people are. It has surprised me continuously throughout my career. Being with your tribe, those are, you know, these are your people. These are the people that are going to be with you.
I really do love the work, and I love the profession, and this last year of COVID has been really hard to be away from it, but at the same time I think it's given us a much needed step back to really evaluate the former model, and moving forwards, if we want to continue with that model, there's a lot of work that theater needs to do as an organization to address institutionalized inequity. And that is that's racial inequity, that is gender inequity. There's a lot of things, and to make it a sustainable lifestyle that will attract people, because we have made it sort of a martyr system, and we all deserve a chance to have a balanced life and a healthy lifestyle. I'm really hopeful moving forward that we can start to really look at equity. Historically, there's a pay discrepancy that's going on between the costume design areas and all of the other areas. Designers are paid differently, the shops and technicians are paid differently, and one reason people think that is that because historically costume design is women's work, and that's not true anymore. And the other professions are not exclusively men's work either. So we need to fix pay discrepancies wherever we see them, whether that's because of gender or orientation or racial ethnic background. So I'm really hopeful that moving forward, we've had an opportunity to look ourselves in the mirror and make better decisions, because I think we have the right spirit and the right energy and the right people to want that change and create that change. And hopefully we can return thoughtfully to the work we love.
And that'll about do it. Thank you so much for being here today, for lending us your wisdom. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much, all.